We're going to begin by each of the artists introducing their work briefly for about 10 minutes each. And then we're going to talk about all sorts of concepts that arise from that, from the intimate to the cosmic, and all points in between. I'd like to start by talking quickly, just giving you a brief intro to Yvette Monaghan's work, and then we'll go on to Claire, and then Claire will take over. So Yvette is an artist from Sligo in the west of Ireland and lives and works in Dublin. And I'm just taking the first paragraph directly from her website. She's a graduate of the MFA photography programme at the Belfast School of Art and has been exhibited extensively. Since 2019, Yvette has been selected as the Irish representative for Visions from Europe and as a Futures Talent at the Unseen Photography Fair. In 2014, she self-published The Time of Dreaming the World as a monograph, and it's still currently on sale. Yvette first came to my attention when she made a series called The Time of Dreaming the World Awake, 2012, I think, which was about a mountain in southern France, which was somehow identified by certain people as the magic mountain of Mayan apocalyptic prophecy. And if that doesn't grab your attention, I don't know what will. It was a great piece. And it was followed up by The 1,000-Year-Old Boy, which was essentially about the nature of landscape and myth, and do landscapes hold stories? Do they hold the experience of the people who lived there? It was also about DNA, and in that way, it kind of announced where her work was going a little bit. It's fair to say that recently, since the birth of her first child, Yvette's work has moved towards the inner landscape, I guess you would call it, the mind, the consciousness, the nature of the cosmic. At present, she has a series called Octopolis on show, actually, as part of the Belfast Photo Festival. Images inspired by Peter Godfrey Smith's quite mind-blowing book called All the Minds, the Octopus, the Sea, and the Deep Origins of Consciousness, which, if you haven't read it, is one of those extraordinary books that will alter the way you think about the world, and certainly alter the way you think about octopuses. So today we're going to be concentrating on I guess what you call a work in progress, which is called A Revolution in Stardust. A series that connects the intimate and the quotidian with the cosmic, and also sees Yvette embracing drawing, sculpture, painting, as well as photography. So I'm going to actually, rather than talk about the work myself, I'm going to hand over now. First of all, I'm going to go to Claire, and then Claire's actually going to start by talking about her work, and then we'll go back to Yvette. So I hope that's clear. I'm introducing both of them at first. So Claire Gallagher is an artist who teaches on the Belfast BA and MFA course, a course that Yvette, of course, graduated from a few years ago. And for me, I've written about her work in the past and described her as the epitome of quiet photography. By that, I mean photography that addresses the everyday and the quotidian with a really deep rigor and sense of attentiveness to things that the rest of us might overlook. And though she is a quiet photographer, I think her work is also informed by a sort of simmering anger. I hope you don't mind me saying that, Claire. About the nature of domestic work, particularly in the female sphere, and the unpaid nature of domestic work. And I think she brings to that sort of such a thoughtfulness that to me runs counter to sort of the hyper alert state of a lot of photography that we live with. Street photography, social documentary, where people are constantly on the alert for subject matter. Instead, this is very, very intimate, and as I say, informed with a politic, which I guess you would call feminist. Well, you would definitely call feminist. So since the Domestic Drift, an earlier series, her work has really been about the nature of the domestic in all its forms: home, housework, family, and the discontents of the same. today, Claire's going to start off by talking about that series. And I just want to say that there's something really interesting about the dynamic of her work between all those things I've talked about. And I hate using the word poetry when I'm talking about photography, but in this nature, there is a sort of poetic aesthetic at work here. It could just be light on a tabletop or on scraps of food, or the nature of dust that gathers in the corners of our domestic interiors and indeed of our lives. So I guess you could say in some conceptual way, without making too big a point about it, that they're both at the minute dealing with dust, everyday dust and cosmic dust. And we'll talk a lot more about that later, and about a lot of other things as well. But I'm going to hand you over now to Claire Gallagher just to take you through a selection of her images. So over to you, Claire.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean, for such a nice introduction. All right, I'm just going to, hopefully that's working. So I'm going to talk about, oh no, I'm in the wrong bit, about the second shift, or I will attempt to. So it's the hidden work of childcare and housework, which is done outside of the women's paid employment. So they do it on top of their paid employment. It's physical, it's mental and emotional labor. It requires time and effort, but it's unpaid and it's largely unrecognized. It's most working women do this, doing 2 work shifts daily, one of them in their leisure hours, which also implies a hierarchy that some people's time matters more than others. And photography doesn't really help in this, because the photographs of home and family tend to ignore it. If you think of the family album, it's usually scenes of family occasions, special occasions, things of smiling, relaxation, pride, fun. And I should say that I'm not an objective observer of the second shift, as Sean was alluding to. This is my lived experience. I'm a full-time lecturer, I'm a researcher, I'm an artist, I'm a mother of 2 gigantic, very unruly teenagers. And I started researching home once the exhaustion and the delirium really of small children and babies dissipated a bit. And I really noticed how my time and my opportunities had been gendered in ways that I hadn't been prepared for. So I had gone to a mixed state school, a mixed gender state school, where the girls went on to study engineering and maths and law and medicine at the same proportions as the boys. And we thought the feminist battle had been won in the 70s, and we set out with expectations of equality, but parenthood revealed that to be a bit of a myth. So I was struggling with reconciling my expectations with experience, and in the previous work, Domestic Drift, I turned the camera towards the boring, beautiful, messy, precious reality of home and family to try to find acceptance and appreciation of all of those non-Kodak moments. But the second shift, on the other hand, is an attempt to recognize and challenge the invisible work that makes home. So it's a call for resistance to the systems which ignore it, which profit from it, like capitalism, and how the unpaid work of home would be worth over £1 trillion every year, or 63% of GDP if it was included, but it isn't. So I was looking at the stuff that I felt frustrated with, angry about, exhausted by, like the dirt, the effort which went into cleaning things just to make them look the same as they had before. And it only lasts a minute. And this maintenance work, it's about keeping things the same. There's no sign of progress. It's repetitive, it's cyclical, and it's invisible unless it's not done. And it's also policed with shame, with a sense of judgment or the threat of judgment. So I started to look for signs of care and kindness in the home, things which matter hugely, but are ignored really by capitalist society. And I think COVID has made it much more visible, what the things that matter and the gestures which keep us all going. And I was looking for resourcefulness, for making do as well. And I was really conscious of a sense of attachment between me and my sons, between them, between us and our home. And, along with closeness and intimacy and warmth, which are really lovely things, they're, home can be much more conflicting. And, it can be a really unsettling experience and, a place of quite profound threat for a lot of people. So I, so look at my sons and, photograph them, as they would let me, in ways which tried to respect their privacy as well. And I realized I'd photographed them reading quite a lot, which seemed to represent them in their own world. And, in a private domain where they kind of had their own understandings and their own kind of almost language. That's my second child who has a whole other language altogether. And, as teenagers, the attachment is evolving and they're detaching from me, which is painful, but it's what I've set out to help them do. And, and detaching from home as well. So we experience home in a different way. And I realize, I feel out of my depth now, but I've also, if I reflect on it, I've felt out of my depth always with them, from when they were babies. And yeah, so when I was making Domestic Drift, it was really about accepting things, appreciating difficulty. So I never moved things. I never tidied up a shot to make it look better. It was about seeing and accepting the everyday in its messy, achy ordinariness. But for the second shift, it was more about finding resistance to the stuff I didn't think that I should accept. And I felt angry at photography because it seems to give a nice, simple surface, which tends to naturalize things, I think. And yeah, and I think I felt like it was not helping naturalize this idea of home, which to me felt anything but natural. So I started thinking about things which might destabilize it, about disrupting or interfering. And so for this image, I had photographed the kitchen roll and then printed it, and I pinched the print to create a crease in it, and then I rephotographed it again to sort of trap that intervention in the photograph. And I like that disturbance. Pinching as well, if you think about it, it's a covert action. It's a really small thing, and it's often associated with women and children. So it's seen as a tool for the weak. Yeah, and this tiny disruption, you might not even notice that it was there. So I liked that it was possible to miss it. And I also wanted to, it's an embodied thing. So I was putting myself into this, this scene where, this all this invisible work, who does it? So it was referring to the work of it there. And yeah, so this is also my second son, who'd stuck a plunger on his belly and was walking around being a Dalek, but and then getting his brother to jump over it as a hurdle. But you know, so that was what made it. But I think for the viewer, that story isn't there at all, and it doesn't need to be. But it's, you know, this mysterious wound on his childish soft flesh. And I thought about how home marks us, and shapes us, shapes our memories, our personalities. So yeah, so the process of making a book out of the series really helped to articulate the anger, the quiet anger that I felt. And disruption was quite an important part of that. So some of the images were cropped. The dust jacket is partial, it's incomplete, is insufficient in a way. And there's lots of layering of things, you know, some very, very heavy cropping, which I felt like was a way to disrupt the idea of a wholeness or a completeness or a straightforwardness, and some layering as well, so you don't always see everything completely, and a sense of home as something constructed. And so that's an exhibition that just closed in Helsinki, and it'll be on in Dublin in a few weeks, I hope. But I just wanted to finish and say that when I set out to do this, I found the character of the work before I'd really shot anything in Sylvia Plath's poem Mushrooms, which, you know, it's got a really quiet, understated resistance. You know, it's the voiceless, it's in the dark. And I recognize its call to kind of taken for granted mass of people. She says, we're shelves, we're tables, we're meek, we're edible, nudgers and shovers in spite of ourselves, our foot's in the door. So that's what I was intending with it all, but thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Interesting territory. I've made a whole heap of notes here. I think I'm going to go off message. All my previous questions have suddenly gone out the window, which is a good thing. So if you would now like to take over and just talk a little bit about your work in progress. Thank you.
So hiya, thanks so much for tuning in. As Sean mentioned, I'm going to talk about A Revolution of Stardust, which is some work I've been making over the past couple of years. And I suppose this work, it started off really with just seeing one image that reminded me of a cosmic image. So I started seeing the cosmic in the everyday. And the catalyst for this was definitely the birth of my child in 2016. Though I didn't start the work straight away, it percolated away for a while, and then I started it a couple of years ago. And I'm not sure if it was seeded by a book that I read on kind of an Indian approach to pregnancy and giving birth back when I was pregnant, but in this book they really believed that bringing a child into the world was a cosmic event. And I'm not sure if that seeded it or if I started thinking about these things, but there came a day where I suddenly saw an image that looked like the moon, and then it made me change the way I was seeing around the house. And I think the thing with having a child was that I definitely, you know, there was a huge external shift that happened. You know, you're spending a lot more time at home, but there was also an internal shift that I didn't quite understand what it was. So I think I've been exploring and investigating what that was. Since then, or, you know, in this work, trying to understand it a bit more. And it started at home, but then it moved beyond. So there was a time when, cobwebs started looking like galaxies. If I was on the beach and the sand was blowing, I was thinking about cosmic winds. And even I spent some time in Italy, and I spent the time inside confession boxes because the interior, I started to think about them as cosmic telephone boxes. So I started seeing everything through this prism of the cosmic. And another thing that happened after the birth of our daughter was that I kind of had this compulsion or this need to make with my hands, which wasn't something that I had done before either. But I had this this need to get my hands into materials, whether it was ink or paint or clay. And so I suppose I did a lot of experimenting, and I used the experimentation through that materiality to allow the process bring me through. because I didn't know where I was going. So I allowed the process very much bring me through that unknown. So I was going to talk a little bit about research and readings and a couple of influences that I did and read and was influenced by at that time. So yeah, scientists believe that some 40 to 80,000 tons of cosmic dust falls to Earth every year. And this dust is made up of colliding, or it comes from asteroids and comets that have collided. And they reckon that because the rock and the dust is preserved by ice, that it may contain dust from the initial creation of the solar system. So this image here it's a grid of images of our back window that's not very clean, but it could actually contain cosmic dust that can tell the story of the solar system. So I think it's kind of phenomenal that you could be cleaning your house and what you're hoovering is actually space dust. So yeah, I started seeing images around the house that remind me of galactical things. So on the left, it's kind of like meteors coming that were sitting on the shower door. And on the right, it kind of felt like it was dark matter that was in a cobweb in the garden. Moved on to other images. So the image on the left is the first scan of our daughter at 8 weeks. And on the right, it's moonlight on the sea just near to where we live. And around this time, I read this study that NASA did of our atoms, and they compared them to atoms in Stardust. And they found that they were 97% the same. So not only are we surrounded by space dust, but we're also made up of it. And like last weekend, we were talking about where we were from, and our little daughter, who's 4 now, she said, well, you know, I come from the stars. I think she's so used to me going on about this subject. But I love that this microcosmic story is also part of the greater cosmic story. And around this time, I started drawing this pattern of circles. I was looking at drawing as a form of meditation. So I was looking to do very, very simple, repetitive acts that would bring me into the form where my intuition was stronger than intellect, or that I was making from that place. And at the time, I suppose I was thinking about Louise Bourgeois' circles and spirals, and how she thought she used her spirals to investigate that constant continuation of birth, life, and rebirth, and that connection to motherhood. And another thing that was really interesting about Bourgeois, or that I found interesting, was when she studied astral maps back to a time when they would have mapped the galaxies to predict harvest moons. So it would have been inherent to survival. But she saw herself not only replicating, but also participating in a cosmic motion by doing these circles and spirals. And I found that really influential. I've also been exploring this pattern of circles through painting. And another artist that's been hugely influential has been Agnes Martin, the minimalist painter, and her grids. I just find them so moving and sublime. But also how Agnes Martin was as an artist, you know, she really believed in that the artist needed to be quiet enough to hear the inner mind and to work from that inner mind in order to allow a sensibility come forward that was from this true place. And another great thing that I read in her notes was that she believed that her paintings equated more to a sound experience than a visual experience. And this really resonated with me at the time. You know, she believed that her paintings were almost like a mantra in a meditation. So these paintings that I've done, they're quite large. They're A0 blackboards that I've etched into. And I suppose I'd love the viewer to, when they come to look at them, would be that they would also listen to them. So sound became very important when making this work. I've been exploring the pattern of circles through kind of sculptural form also. So here there's some clay and some glass wax. I've also been using a lot of gold. And I suppose I was thinking about how, I suppose just throughout art history and also in all religious iconography and buildings, they use gold to talk about ideas about immortality and transcendence. And I read somewhere that the Incas called Gold Tears of the Sun. So yeah, I've been exploring it through some photographic materials as well. So I etched this pattern onto some acetate, and then I exposed it onto 8x10 sheets of film using the sun, and then fixed them. And I felt like this pattern was kind of following me around for a while. So this is an image of a chopping board that I saw in a little hotel in Spain. So I couldn't believe it when I walked in and saw my pattern there. A book that I can recommend to read, Underlined by Robert Mcfarlane. It's just mind-blowing. But what it's about is Mcfarlane explores under the Earth's surface, so anywhere underground. And he uses it as a way to talk about where we are right now in the world with the Anthropocene. So he explores the catacombs in Paris, and he also explores caves in Finland where they're about to entomb, you know, our nuclear waste, uranium waste for the next 100,000 years or so. But the chapter that really blew me away was when he goes into a dark matter lab under the Whitby coast in the UK. And it's about a mile underground. But he goes in and there's these machines and they're sweeping the galaxy of the constellation, the Swan constellation, in search of a very fine particle wind. And they call it the breath of the universe. But basically what they're looking for is the resonance that's left over from the initial expansion of the universe, or a whisper from the Big Bang. And there's a really lovely part in the chapter when Mcfarlane asks the young physicist who's sitting at the machine, and he says, you know, why are you looking through all this dark matter? And he says, well, you know, to further our knowledge, but also to give life meaning. If we're not exploring, we're just waiting. And another writer who's been hugely influential has been the late Tim Robinson, the writer and cartographer who lived in Connemara. I was really lucky to meet Tim a few times and attend the Roundstone talks. But in a tribute to him, it was actually Robert Mcfarlane. He talked about Tim's radiant attention. And I found that so beautiful, that when Tim gave something his radiant attention, he enlivened it. And Tim was amazing because he had that zoomed in vision, and then he was able to zoom back out and give a context. So very much what I'm talking about here, looking at this, you know, microcosmic out to the cosmic. You know, if Tim talked about the corner of a field, he would be able to bring in all the myth and history and conversations that had ever happened at that corner of a field, and then allow that to talk about the entire landscape. So it's been really amazing to kind of investigate their work by listening to, or by reading Tim, really. And I'm going to finish with this image. It's called Sky Lashes. And it's an image of the night sky that was taken out in the deserts in Spain where there's no light pollution. And then it's collaged with my daughter's eyelashes. I suppose very much looking at that microcosmic out to the cosmic and blending the two of them. But I really, I suppose this work has really changed the quality of my own attention, and I kind of looking at really small things to talk about much bigger things. So I thought I'd just finish with a couple of lines from Tim's essay, Tim Robinson again. It's called Orion the Hunter. And this story is a discussion between the mythological and the scientific worldview using the constellation of Orion. So I'll finish with these few lines. Constellation is the name of an act, the quintessentially human act of joining up the dots, leaping over the dark, stringing events into stories, stories into persons, persons into history. Before we came, stars unnamed bloomed and seeded and blew away like dandelion fluff. And we may not always be here to keep up the pretense of meaning. Thanks.
Amazing. I've done the same thing as I did with Claire, which I have a whole page of notes now, which have thrown out my previous thinking about all this. I mean, I'm interested in this notion. I'm not trying to sort of pull you both together, but this sort of attentiveness to small things, and somehow through those small things, much bigger things are revealed. And is that something that you would agree you both have in common? Either one of you can answer that one.
That.
That's clear. Yeah, I mean, I wonder, is it been kind of forced in one way to have to look at things around you very closely by all the things that Claire was talking about? And, you know, there definitely is a restriction when you have small children. You're not as free to roam the hills as you were before in the way I used to make work. But then again, I don't know if I'm using that as an excuse to that I'm probably at the stage where I could go out again if we weren't locked down. But I think like been around the house a lot more. I think everyone's found this during lockdown. You just start to look at things differently. You start to see things. So maybe by becoming through motherhood, you're kind of forced to look at the minutiae in your life a lot more.
Yeah, I mean, I've always photographed what's been really close, like really, really, really close to me for 20 odd years. But it was when I was originally intending to back to Northern Ireland to photograph, because I had that difficulty of trying to accept the reality of all of it, you know, how dark and dreary and cold and wet it is. And I think so I wanted to do it in a broader way, but my younger son outgrew the buggy, and he was the second child, and he was running like pell-mell everywhere, so I couldn't photograph anywhere else except at home where he was like pinned. But I think looking, you know, I think for me, the more I look at home, the bigger a subject it becomes, and it seems to touch on vast amount of things, but huge amounts of our experience are reflected in it. So it's maybe a big subject, but in small ways.
Yeah. I mean, I was just struck at that when you were talking that your work has come out of it. I mean, it's quite a profound shift of consciousness as much as anything, you know, in your own being and in your own head. I mean, it's not just a shift in your practice. It's been driven by quite I hesitate to use the word cosmic again, but quite a big philosophical shift in your thinking.
Yeah, definitely. And it's been an attempt to understand that inner shift, you know, because I think it's not a tangible thing, so it's to try and figure out a way to try and understand that and kind of force work through the cracks of it as well.
Yeah.
But definitely huge waves of change happened, and I think that's the amazing thing about photography or making any kind of work, is that you can try to understand it through these different ways that you mightn't have that outlet otherwise.
And in any way, did you find it difficult, the transformation? Was it a struggle?
Mm-hmm, definitely. Yeah.
Because you talk as if it was instinctive, that you started, you know, messing around with your hands and making stuff and molding stuff. Had you any experience of that, art experience of that previous?
None. No.
It's entirely new.
Yeah.
And you said it was also intuitive. You used that word a couple of times. So there was a need to do this.
Very much.
Just a creative need or something deeper?
Yeah, that is a tricky question. I think it is both, is the answer. Yeah, it was like a compulsion, you know, a necessity. And I gave a talk a couple of years ago, and a young photographer, Roisin White, her mother, came up to me afterwards and said, "I know exactly what you mean. I had exactly the same thing happen. So at least I don't feel alone in it." But I went back to study at NCD at night, you know, to feed that, to try and find a way to learn to make and to learn a few new skills, and not a few new skills, to actually find a way through this and to be able to know what to do with my hands, exactly what it was. But it was coming from somewhere that I don't quite understand.
I mean, did it also help to kind of carve out that time for yourself to do that? To give yourself
Definitely. It's like a sanctuary, isn't it? So I love studio time. But I think, you know, as well, it was a way to and I think everyone feels the same about this, to get away from the computer. You know, when you get into photography, it's such an active thing, and then because of digital and everything, suddenly I found myself spending an awful lot of time on the computer. And one day I just realized, you know, I was spending huge amounts of time sitting at a computer, and I wanted to get away from that.
Yeah. Well, have either of you experienced a frustration with photography as a medium to grapple with these quite intuitive ideas? Is photography the correct medium for this sort of stuff? It's a very provocative question, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Well, I mean, I have problems with photography. I mean, I love it, but you know, I get angry at it. So I think coming out of the second shift, I've also done, or along the way, I did some video work of like my blocked sync, because it is forever blocking because we are rubbish. And my progeny are also rubbish at doing anything about the home. But like of the debris swirling around as I tried to undo the blockages all the time. And Yvette, you were talking, I think you were saying about that it was, you notice in your sink that it looked like the moon. Was it that it looked like a moonscape? Yeah. So I think there are other ways. And I have a lint piece of my tumble dryer, you know, the lint from the filter of the tumble dryer as well. So just ways of trying to, you know, how do you represent the time that goes into the home, I think, and it's photography maybe isn't the best for showing that, you know, that buildup of time and that repetitive cycle of time.
And is this where is your anger springing from that, or is it springing from other things about photography? I can't know the answer to this one.
It's so neat, and I'm not a neat. I can't. Home is not a neat. Well, my home is not neat. And I don't like the idea that it's not simple, it's not straightforward, and it's not neat. And photography tends to make it that way. And also it's got so many standards. You know, it's like things are supposed to be sharp and clean and neat. And I mean, you know, if you get a print mounted and it's got a bit of dust, but you know, but in between the substrate and the print, and like that's a terrible thing.
That's a crime.
It's a crime. But what if that's a good thing? You know, what if you like stuffed things in there? So I kind of felt mischievous with photography and also cross with it. So yeah, and I think, you know, part of hacking up the images in the book as well was kind of an assault on them.
The pristine nature of the thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
How much?
Sorry. Just, the idea that art and photography has become, you know, the production values have become so high, so they become very expensive. But it seems to go against all ideas of art making. You know, this idea of perfection, that they've become products. Or I remember an Irish photographer getting given out to a Parry Photo for one of his frames, and they said, you know, these images are to go in people's houses that are very expensive, and everything in that house is very expensive. So, you know, these need to look, you know, like they fit into this very expensive place. And like, I just remember hearing that thinking, like, this is where it's all gone wrong. You know, they're not products to make your house look nicer. You know, you're supposed to be producing art. And art isn't perfect. So, you know, there would have been a time when people had masters, and I suppose they have to satisfy that need. But this idea that, you know, I sometimes go to exhibitions and they're not made, the pieces aren't made by the artist at all. You know, it's fabrication. They've had it fabricated for them. And so, yeah, sometimes I just wonder about that. Like, whereas I like seeing the making in it.
Yeah, it's one of the things about Parry Photo when you go there and you see those huge pristine prints, and something just dies in your soul when you've seen the 10th one. I mean, when you were talking there, Claire, I immediately thought of Stephen Gill's work and his whole notion of interrupting the photograph and, you know, dropping twigs and pieces of, and you know, I think at one point he buried them under the ground, his prints, for a couple of years. There's something about that sort of creative destruction, isn't there, that's really liberating.
Yeah, but do you know, it's quite hard to, I find it quite hard to give myself permission. so, so it's really, really difficult to kind of mess things up. I mean, I know I live in mess, but it's the kind of deliberate, I just think, oh God, I'm making work for myself by doing this.
Yeah, yeah,
Hard.
yeah. I was going to mention, I mean, we shouldn't mention other photographers, but I think we need to talk about Renko Kawachi in this, don't we? Because there's something about what she's been doing for many years, this sort of luminous fragility of, you know, the everyday wonderment of those images, which I remember when I gave a talk at your college, it really divided people on the gender, really on the gender lines. It was like all the blokes just hated the work, with the exception of one or two, including the tutors. I don't know if you remember that. But for that reason alone, I thought it was quite an interesting talk. But she's someone who is, and I think in the later stuff she's been doing with the mountains and stuff, there's something going on that's kind of akin to what you're doing, that she's moving outward to look at sort of the more sort of, I mean, I hate this word, there must be another word for cosmic. It's so loaded, that term, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
I keep thinking of progressive rock bands.
But I
But
think what Renko does is like, which is lovely to be reminded of, and I don't know why people have such a problem with it, but it's the sense of wonder. You know, whenever you're, you know, having a day, you know, she reinforces that sense of wonder all the time in her work. And I don't know if that's why, I don't know if men have a problem with things that are not like grand in their scale or their subject matters. They have to be, you know, the things are often seen as women's topics like birth and home are not seen as important, whereas war is seen as important. But you know, it's just strange because we're all born at some point and we all die at some point, or you know, they seem like the important things to me. But it seems like that gentle treatment of something is not liked for that
yeah,
reason because
yeah,
it's too soft.
You know, that's also with one of the problems I have with photography. You know, it's how closely linked it is to the sublime and to scale. You know, that has to be big. You know, and perfection and permanence. You know, so those are all things which are really, you know, they're not the be all and end all. I think Renko is, you know, she addresses all of that in work, which, you know, does the opposite in every respect of those, and it's wonderful.
I find a really interesting quote, which I'm not, you know, it's from an interview I did, but I think it is very pertinent to this, where she said, and it reminded me a bit of Agnes Martin actually as well. She said, first of all, it's about finding a certain space of mind. And then I follow my intuition without thinking. Thinking is much too boring. It's not good. It stops the surprising from coming through. I just thought that's amazing. That, you know, she's saying the exact opposite of what you were just talking about, Claire. It's not overthought. It's very much channeling the unconscious, the intuitive. And I was going to ask you both. I mean, the unconscious plays a part in both your practices, right? No.
No,
Yes,
No, you don't think so?
I do think so. Yes.
I haven't a clue. I don't know.
I suppose I'm always trying to access that part of myself through by using this intuitive approach.
Yeah. And letting your thoughts sort of somehow free themselves from having to do stuff.
Well, I just know when I plan things in my head, there it's yeah, that never works out well. You know, you're better to allow a process or a making or yeah, your intuitive process bring you through it because it'll always bring you to a more interesting place than your head could ever come up with, I think.
And you showed us, I don't know if you mind me revealing this, but last week we had a pre-chat chat and you showed us your notebooks.
Mm.
They seem to me to be an integral part of, I mean, you could almost exhibit some of the stuff in that. I mean, they're so integral to what you're doing and to they explain so much about your way of thinking and where you're at the minute.
Yeah, I've started to, yeah, the last few years I've really focused on the notebooks just as a way of progressing ideas and also drawings, you know, start out on drawings there, you know, so I just have pages and pages of circles. But I think what it's really helpful, to look back and, ideas and thoughts are like dreams, you forget them. So to look back, you almost have a diary of your work, like of your working thoughts to look back. And I think there's such a value in the notebook for even that, because it's just, you start to see where the links were made, even though now it seems very complete in retrospect, but you just see the emerging of the idea, and it's so helpful to go back and see, oh yeah, I used to be at that place and now I'm here. So it helps when you're in the next thing to realize, like, just by putting all these bits together, you start kind of mapping it out for yourself and feeling your way forward. And they're just so useful to kind of constantly refer back to. Like, I have about 3 or 4 on the go for different things, and they're just like, I really can't recommend notebooking as a serious part of art making.
Yeah, a lot of what you were talking about earlier, when you were talking about clearing the mind and the meditative space. I thought of John Cage. I don't know if he's in your frame of reference, but that whole.
This is a book I forgot.
Oh, there you go.
Anyway, I've been reading that for about 2 years, but it's so dense that I need to stop at every 2 pages and think about it.
Yeah.
That's right. Go on.
I just think he's so pertinent to where we live now in terms of clearing the distractions and trying to find this place where the work can blossom at its own speed. Claire, you've been doing this. It struck me when I was looking back at your work, you've been kind of single-minded for a long time, looking at these domestic sort of issues. And I know I mentioned there is a politic underneath it, though it's not immediately apparent in your work, I don't think. I mean, it's not angry, grandstanding work. It's very much observational. And yet there is an anger and a politic there. And I wondered, we have to talk at some point about the still quite predominantly male world of photography. I mean, when you were talking earlier on about your frustrations, is some of it at those sort of patriarchal structures that continue to sort of loom over us?
Well, it's in lots of ways. I think there's structural sexism, in lots of ways, which affect what we do in the home, but also and what we do at work and how we are at work, and also what is appreciated and valued as subject matter. So it's to do something which is in the home is kind of putting yourself into a box, or it risks putting yourself into a box, which when I was at art college, the women who did that were called knitters, because nobody thought they were doing anything serious. So yeah, I think there's structural issues galore, really, which I think part of the problem, I think, is that each of us is divided in our homes, kind of struggling and wondering why we're crap at maintaining our work and our home and our children and everything else. And so we get bogged down and think that it's my personal failings. I'm failing to do this properly, but actually, we're all failing to do it because we've been set up to fail. It's not possible. We can't have standards that we're supposed to have. We can't uphold them anyway. And it's sort of ludicrous that they exist like that anyway. So I could go on till the cows come home by that.
Yeah, and they're not really acknowledged, I don't think, as much as they were once. They were once central to the whole feminist debate, and don't seem to be anymore. The notion of the domestic toil and struggle. Maybe there's a whole rise of middle class feminism where they can pay people to take care of all these things, and who knows.
Feminism have focused on different things, and I'd say I'm probably old school second wave. Third and fourth, I find them very hard to. I think they speak a very they have a very narrow version of their remit, I think.
And in fact, you spoke last week briefly about. Well, you should actually, if you want to tell the story, but you mentioned the word dabbler had been applied to you, which I couldn't quite imagine in this day and age. But is there still that prevalent idea that somehow a female artist is dabbling while a male artist is serious? Can that still be the case?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't think so. And I suppose like, you know, a lot of my friends are artists or different things, so it just wouldn't come into consideration. But I think Sean is talking about. We were talking about Linda Naughlin's essay, "Why There Are No Great Female Artists," which was written in 1971. But this one, you know, she's talking about systemic problems that are behind that loaded question. But one of the things that they're talking about in Victorian times, that men were seen if they made art, that they were serious artists, whereas if women did it, they were dabbling. But I was at a party last year, and I was asked. Myself and my husband are both photographers, and we were asked what we did. And my husband finished talking about his work, and then they turned to me and said, the man said, "Do you still dabble?" And you know, whatever, I had the smoke coming out of my ears, and I answered. And then afterwards, I said, "Why would you think that?" And he said, "Well, because I saw that you had a child." So, I mean, you know, as surprising to me as it was to you, I think, to hear that actually was still prevalent, and that was still a prevalent opinion. So I don't know.
Yeah. So the pram in the hall being the sort of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I've actually heard a curator quote that as well, and say, "Oh, that person, you know, somebody had recently had a baby who is someone who definitely didn't even seem to, you know, even make them cause for pause. They just seem to plow on with work. They were just, you know, yeah, that type of person." So, and I heard the curator say, "Well, we'll see what happens with them now that there's a pram in the hall."
Horrible phrase, yeah.
Yeah, it is. And this was a female curator. So I was kind of shocked as well that that's
Yeah.
still not out there.
Freelance.
Irrelevant once you have a baby because your work is no longer relevant.
Yeah.
Freelance just released their report into the representation of women in art, or well, female artists being represented, and in the UK, and they interviewed lots of women, and you know, and the results are really depressing. You know, the kinds of issues that women have encountered in the art world, and you know, trying to reconcile, you know, these different parts of their lives, and be permitted really to go and make art.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things we need to talk about here, because we're a bit in danger of going off. Both of you, I mean, there is a transformative element of what you do. I mean, you are transforming this everydayness just by the act of paying attention to it, reflecting it. I mean, there is a liberating, transformative ideal at the heart of both of your practices, and I think it's one of the things that's amazing about your work, Yvette, is that it runs contrary to all the things we've just been talking about. You know, it is actually been precipitated by having a child, and it is a very optimistic sort of. It gives that sense of all the possibilities inherent after that happens, rather than the limitations.
Yeah, and like Claire, I see limitless possibilities for making work at home or close to home, or in the studio at home. So it feels like a very joyful thing to be making work in that place rather than a restriction.
Yeah.
Mm.
Do you want to say anything about Claire, or will I? I was going to ask some questions that have been sent, that have been posted up here, if that's okay. This is for Claire. It's from Trish Lamb, who we all know. You mentioned the organic process of your children detaching from you as they grow. Are you now experiencing a pull towards the world beyond the home?
For me, no, actually, it's the opposite. So attachment, I originally set out with the second shift to look in a much bigger way at attachment, but I realized then that the subject was so huge that I couldn't really do it justice in the series. So that's something I really, really want to do. You know, that, yeah. And I think attachment actually is ironic, having finished just before COVID, you know, how much that's affected our view of attachment, and of home, of course, as well, and dirt, and, you know, and cleaning, and all those things. but attachment, I think, yeah, and the detachment is, is part of it, and the struggles, and yeah, contradictions, I think.
Yeah. Let me just bring up another one. Oh yeah, so could you explain in more detail the image with the gold triangle? I think that's for you, Yvette. These are coming up in front of my screen. The image with the gold triangle, that's one of your sculptural pieces, I think, is it?
No, it's a photograph, actually. It's a photograph of the inside of a jar, photographed through a prism, and then I drew an upside down triangle on it, and then I did, yeah, do some other white stuff on it, and like as in white pen drawings, and then I applied gold leaf onto it. And again, it was one of those things I just did instinctively. It was a lot of interventions on the print, but my brother sent me a link to a thing on upside down triangles, and it turns out it's a symbol of everything relating to fertility and the feminine and the moon. So there you go.
So one of the things I thought when you were talking about your work was that whole notion, I don't know if it's a Buddhist notion, but the whole notion that everything is connected in the universe, and the fluttering of a butterfly's wings can cause a storm 1,000 miles away, all that sort of stuff. That's going on, and there's quite a big reach going on, isn't there, metaphysically in your work?
Yeah, definitely.
Someone here is asking, Claire, this is a good one. Has being a tutor made you more critical of your own practice?
That's aim. No, I've always been hypercritical, imposter the works. No, and I've been a tutor for 17 years, so I think it's been there so long I can't remember what I was like before that, but awful probably. Yeah.
And this is an anonymous attendee. I read an interview with the musician Gazelle Twin the other day, who is a mother, and she spoke about the rage, in inverted commas, which I feel is the same as the quiet anger you mentioned with Claire. How does this quiet anger affect you? Does it become useful to fuel your creative drive?
Oh God, yeah, it's definitely motivates me, but the drive to create work is different at different points. For Domestic Drift, it was different. For Verges, it was different. And for this, it was definitely about the anger. But that it was what had evolved from doing, other projects about accepting the messiness, for example, but then thinking, well, what goes into, who's trying to wrangle the mess? Oh, that would be me. And then starting to feel angry enough to do something about it.
Yeah. Someone's asked if you can show your notebooks on camera. I'm not sure. Can you do that, Yvette? Do you even want to do that? I mean, I shouldn't.
Possibly not. Just have to dig it out. But
okay.
Hang on.
And it's an attendant question. Okay. Oh, okay. She's going to show the notebooks.
Well, no, in a second. I have to find an interesting page. Some of it
yeah.
Very interesting.
While you're doing that, there's an interesting question from Katie Walls, sorry. She's addressing this to you, Yvette, but I think either of you could answer it. Could you say a bit more about your process of research, the many things you read and learn, I suppose, outside of the actual work? I mean, a lot of it, I guess, is textual rather than visual.
Well, oh God, it's everything for me. Films were important to me. Literature, like novels, was important. Different theoretical things was important. There were archives were important. I went to the oh God, what's it called in Sussex? The mass observation. Lots and lots of things. Conversations really important. Lots of people spark things often in my head through discussion. So I did a lot of field work with other working mothers and their their perspectives really helped me along the way.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Okay. So you went out in the field and did your research?
Yeah. Like a real researcher.
Yeah. And you mentioned some of the theoretical work, which kind of makes a small, it comes into your book a little bit with quotations and stuff, but were there key texts along the way?
Oh God, yeah. Michel de Certeau and the practice of everyday life. He's talking about tactical resistance as a kind of tool of the week against, authorities, Rancière and the distribution of the sensible. Who gets heard in society, who gets seen, and how to disrupt that. Mary Douglas, talking about dirt. That's really seminal.
Yeah. And the Guy Debord, I think that the whole idea of the derive. Could you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so the derive is the French for drift, and it was what gave me the drift bit in domestic drift. And so the situationists were, I don't want to call them pissheads, but they were kind of anarchist, lefty types, and were part of Paris in '68. But they were all about trying to kind of cause a revolution of everyday life, which strikes a chord with me. And so the theory of the derive was that it was a way of shifting yourself out of your habitual ways of moving, of acting, of being, your usual motivations for doing things, so, and I felt myself back then when the kids were maybe about 5 or 6, that I was just trapped in this kind of, I was almost wearing paths through the floor, doing the same things back and forth. And someone would make a mess, so I would rush to clear it up. And I just thought, why, I can't even, it was so hard to shift myself out of those ways of being. So I took that theory of the derive and applied it to home. So Debord would have had a fit, but because they were all about going around the city and doing wild and wacky things.
Yeah. I love how you equate anarchist lefties with pissheads.
Oh, no, that was just them. Not all anarchist lefties. No, and Lefebvre was one. He was affiliated with them, or taught them really. But he was much more serious.
Yeah. Debord is an extraordinary prescient thinker, I think, isn't he, for our times? I mean, we're living in the society of the spectacle now, aren't we? Really?
Every year it gets truer and truer.
Yeah. Yvette, have you found a acceptable enough book to show us?
No, I don't think. Yeah, it'll take me too long. Sorry, to go through it and find something decent to show.
Oh, don't worry. This is a question for both of you. It's actually a statement. It's from Maria Teresa Merman. Thank you, Claire and Yvette, for sharing your work. Really enjoyed your talks. As someone who is also interested in work made and about the home, it's great to see other artists grappling with these difficulties and turning them into possibilities. I do find there's often resistance to work about and made within the domestic space, with it often being seen as gender specific. A question for you both. Do you feel you needed to overcome that sort of stigma about making work in and about the home, as women artists in particular, or was it a driving force? Or both, indeed.
Definitely. I mean, that's I went to art college when the women were called knitters, and the women tutors were called part-timers, even though they were full-time because they left work on time. So I really struggled with making work about home, and I thought it was going to be, I was just going to be crucified, and was surprisingly not crucified. I mean, there were certain times when I think any engagement I've had with the Guardian has resulted in absolute outrage. Quite funny, but anyway.
With the Guardian?
Yes, like your article. They put a piece from Domestic Drift in like 2012 or 2011 or something, and oh my God, people went ballistic. How is that picture? That's terrible. It's awful. Why didn't she clean up first? That window's disgusting.
Oh, and that happened in the recent piece as well.
Yeah. People went mad. Friends were sending me the messages for days afterwards.
So they weren't actually looking at the work, they were looking at the fact that you were confirming your untidiness to the world.
Yes, I mean, how is that? What's the world come to when the Guardian is putting this shite out in the world?
Oh my God.
What's wrong with her?
Yeah, well, that's part. You should never look at those comments, and people certainly shouldn't send you them. Emily Paris wants to know, I guess for both of you, have you ever explored the psychogeographic route within your practice? There's a question for you. So I guess walking on foot and experiencing the city and all its distractions, and I've just been writing about this, was why I can rhyme it off.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely used it in previous work. You know, and I suppose, yeah, I used Tim Robinson's idea of the adequate step, you know, where each step takes in the physical, but also the mythological and the political. Yeah, so I suppose that, you know, that was a bit of psychogeography, but no, I haven't been using it.
Now it's interior psychogeography, I guess.
Walking around in my head.
Walking around inside your head is great. What about you, Claire? I suppose Fergus.
Well, I mean, but psychogeography was what was set out in order to counteract. It was to disrupt that effect of place on your state of mind, and to give you a chance to break out of it. So absolutely, yeah. I mean, yeah. Oh my God, it's all about the state of mind.
It is all about state of mind, isn't it? Yeah. There's two questions here that kind of coincide. That I'm really interested in your desire to use your hands and be tactile with the materials in your work. How do you feel the sensory experience of working physically with your objects informs the photographic process?
Yeah, I suppose the image isn't the final thing, which it used to be before. You know, I'm always looking to see what I can do now. Is there an intervention I can make? Can I make holes in it, or can I hang it up somewhere and let the rain fall on it? Or, you know, there's always, now I think about the image as a thing that I can play with rather than it being the end product. So I don't know if that answers that, but you know, there's a lot more playing around with prints, and I'd love to, you know, make more sculptural objects out of prints as well. Things like that. Yeah, there's just a lot more playfulness with it now.
Yeah. This is a question just coming from me. Do you both see your work as a sort of unified project? Like the whole thing that's got you to where you are? Or is it each series of a very different thing onto itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think of them all as like chapters in my life that have happened and that I've explored through photography. So I kind of see them as one big autobiography that's happening, you know, just at a distance, possibly, or that I'm showing at a distance. And I suppose it's, you know, I've always used this intuitive approach. So the hope is that people will always read the same sensibility from it, no matter, even though the work might look different and it might be in a different place, but that there's always a sensibility that's read from it that makes it look like it's come from me, and that it's my work. But yeah, it's definitely, I think it's how you explore your life is through this prism of photography. So it's, yeah, that's, I don't know what you think, Claire.
Oh, absolutely. What you said, brilliant. Yeah, I mean, it's you know, they're all parts of a trajectory, I think, of a journey. And actually, I was reading the Helsinki bus station theory to the students last week. Yeah, and it's just, I'm on my bus. I'm still on my bus. I think I'll always be on my bus. But I'll be looking at different things out the window, or not.
Yeah. I'm going to take one more question here, and I don't know which one to go for. Okay, this is a very practical question from Shona Kelly, right? Hi, Claire and Yvette. I'm a recent graduate and working on a new series on home. I currently dislike where I'm from, the Ards Peninsula, but I still want to make a series about it. Do you have any advice for helping me overcome these issues of hating a subject but also wanting to pursue it? entire population of the Ards Peninsula will now posting.
It's funny. We have a student who is from Newton Ards and has a real she struggles with that, with coming from there, and actually has been making work about that that difficulty for her, and a lot of it's been intervening in images to kind of put her feelings or to embed her feelings into it, and I think she sort of moved around more to photographing things as they are, as a kind of acceptance of what is around her, but her feelings about it were, you know, were the reason why she set out to make the work.
How about you, Yvette? Any advice for someone who hates the terrain that they're photographing?
Well, I don't know why. I was thinking about, was it Stephen Gill who attached the camera to the fence in Sweden, and
The fence post, yeah.
In the bird kept coming along every day, and he took pictures of it, or that's just where the bird lived. Was it that it would, every time it passed by, he'd take a picture?
Well, the pillar. Is this the pillar?
Yeah, the pillar. Yeah.
I think it was the camera was activated by the movement.
Activation, was it by the bird passing? But I love that series. But I just think there's so many different ways to make work about a place. So even if you don't like the place, you know, there's so many different ways of doing it. But I just thought Stephen Gill did such an amazing job of talking about place through that work. There might be something to think about.
Okay. I realise we've been on here for an hour and 15 minutes, and this morning I just read that most people's concentration span is 40 minutes, so I think we've given them enough to be going on with. But thank you both for such an engaging sort of interaction. It was really, I mean, you always wonder if these things will work when it's more than one artist, but it was really good, and I think quite seamless. And I hope it sends people off in search of your work. And I can't wait for the new work. And thanks to you both again, to Claire Gallagher and to Yvette Monaghan. And I've got to now find a piece of paper that Michael to do the thing. Yeah. So on Saturday, this Saturday coming at 6 p.m, there is another session called Promoting Your Work, chaired by the one and only Claire Gallagher, who'll be making an appearance once more. So that's 6 p.m. Saturday. But we're done here. And thank you all for tuning in, and thank you especially to the artists.
Thank you so much, John.